Hello and welcome to Lapping Analytics. My name is Jimmy Lapping. I'm a psychologist and statistician with an interest in learning, teaching, assessment, organizational behavior, and a few other areas. I'm also a statistician who applies statistical methods to social science research and also practical problems. And I also develop my own statistical methods. Now, this video will be about ChatGPT and how we can use it to facilitate our teaching, our coaching, our learning as students or lifelong learners, professionals, and assessment. Because, well, we seem to be living in times where ChatGPT and similar platforms can provide answers to any question. Not so few seem to think that because of that, teaching, learning, and assessment, well, are to a large extent at least becoming obsolete. So in this video, I argue with an example that teaching, learning, and assessment are not obsolete. We just need to evolve to the next level as we have done in previous eras. We need to evolve, we need to adapt to the environment around us. If we fail to do so, then our efforts become useless. So the example that I'm going to use in this video is an example from social science research, which is an area in which I am very active myself. So what I did is I opened the free version of ChatGPT, version 4.0, and I entered the following text. A total of 40 participants were randomly allocated to 4 cells in a 2x2 experimental design, 10 participants per cell. The dependent variable of interest is ordinal, that is, each participant receives either a poor, borderline, satisfactory, or excellent rating for their performance on the task in the experiment. How should I analyze the data? So this was literally what I fed to ChatGPT as a prompt. Now there is of course quite a bit of information in this piece of text. First of all, there are 40 participants, so a sample of 40. In a 2x2 experimental design, that's why that says randomly allocated to the 4 combinations or cells in a 2x2 experimental design. Also useful to know that there were 10 participants per cell, so it is a balanced design, provided that there was no missing data, of course, which isn't mentioned in this prompt. The dependent variable of interest is ordinal, that is, each participant receives either a poor, borderline, satisfactory, or excellent rating. Ordinal because these are ordered categories, although one may not agree on whether the difference between poor and borderline performance is the same as between borderline and satisfactory or between satisfactory and excellent. We can all agree that borderline is better than poor, satisfactory is better than borderline, and excellent is the best of all. So it's an ordinal outcome variable. So ChatGPT gave quite a bit of text on options that we could consider, and the bottom line actually quite accurately reflects that piece of text. So this is what ChatGPT spit out at the end. Use ordinal logistic regression, the cumulative link model, to analyze the 2x2 factorial effects on your 4-level ordinal outcome. Check assumptions. If violated or underpowered, use ART or descriptive plus non-parametric approaches. It's actually quite a vague bottom line if you happen to be a statistician or someone else who has done research and used statistics before. There are quite a few things in here to unpack, and I will do that now one by one. First of all, use ordinal logistic regression is basically it's a starting point. It's in bold, so that is identified as the first candidate, and that is also what was in the large chunk of text, which I will not show here, so I don't have to scroll back and forth and zoom in and zoom out. That just makes this kind of videos difficult to follow. So, but yeah, the main candidate was ordinal logistic regression. Now that is quite questionable in my view, because I mean, having worked in medical education for quite a few years, where this kind of rating scales, poor, borderline, satisfactory, and excellent, are used to, especially to assess performance in simulation exercises, role plays, and other simulation exercises, either individual or team performance. And well, what usually happens with this kind of scales is that the percentage of poor performance is very low. In fact, in the programs in which I was responsible or co-responsible for assessment, it was about 5% of a cohort, of a student cohort. If you translate that to 40 people, that would be about 2 people. That's a problem, because if you have categories that have only 2 cases, if you have 4 cells, that means that there will be at least 2 cells with 0, and one or 2 cells with 1 or 2 observations. So that's not very useful. This is a kind of situation when ordinal logistic regression fails, becomes invalid. The same holds for excellent performance, and to some extent also borderline. It's usually like a 20%-ish proportion of a student cohort, which for 40 people would be about 8 people per category. If you have 4 cells, again, that comes down to, on average, 2 observations per cell. So with this kind of small numbers per category, logistic regression will either provide questionable results or outright invalid. It's that simple. And so yeah, this kind of phenomenon is likely with this kind of rating scales. Usually it's about a 50 or 60%, and satisfactory in the other categories way lower. Now, another thing is, even if there was not such a strong tendency towards 1 or 2 categories, still with only 40 participants in a 2x2 design, you're going to normally have limited or very limited statistical power, especially for moderate or smaller effects, which are common in educational and psychological and other social science research. Statistical power is basically the chance that if in the population out there is an effect, what is the chance that that effect that you are studying in your sample is going to be statistically significant as well? With this kind of sample size, you're poorly equipped. It's quite unlikely that you will detect such an effect unless it's large. Now, so that's not a very likely candidate in my view. And we'll analyze the 2x2 factorial effects. That's at least well said, because it's a 2x2 design, and there are main effects and a two-way interaction effect. Those are the factorial effects. So that's at least okay. And then the remainder of the piece is, well, check assumptions, and if violated or underpowered, use blah blah blah. Well, it's good that ChatGPT says assumptions should be checked. That should always be done. But it seems to suggest here in this formulation that only if assumptions are violated or underpowered, we should use something or descriptive statistics. Well, descriptive statistics are always reported. Whether you go to a conference, write your master's thesis or an article for a journal or a book chapter, it does not make sense to provide outcomes of inferential statistics without presenting descriptive statistics first, because those descriptive statistics give somewhat of an understanding of what your distributions look like. And for instance, you could here already see if there are categories that have very small numbers, because if that's the case, then ordinal regression becomes problematic. So that's a bit of an awkward formulation in my view. Descriptive should always be done, and that should always precede inferential statistics. It's this kind of descriptive statistics which allows you to check in the first place if some of the key assumptions are realistic or not. Well, okay, so that's about the descriptive part. Um, Another thing is that it seems to say if the studies, if it's underpowered with ordinal logistic regression, then you could somehow use non-parametric approaches. Well, it's not necessarily the case that non-parametric approaches have a better statistical power or worse statistical power than an ordinal logistic regression model or another alternative. It is you need to it can go either way. It can go either way, and it depends to some extent also which non-parametric approach you use, and that is the next point. That ChatGPT, when it comes to statistics, and that has been my experience repeatedly, is as with so many other topics, it just of course, it uses information which is readily available online, and it uses especially information which is found quite easily or is shared in many sources. And this is the same for non-parametric approaches. So when you ask for non-parametric approaches, or in this case, ChatGPT suggested that in response to my prompt, what it does is it says, well, yeah, you can use something like Man-Whitney U, for instance. Well, that is an option, but it's not one of the options that in recent years has been demonstrated as one of the better options. It is certainly a test that has been used in many fields and continues to be used because among the people who know about non-parametric methods, this is one of the most common methods. But there are better alternatives, which I will not discuss in much detail now because I don't want this to turn into a 1 hour lecture. There are better alternatives. If you're interested, you can drop a comment below the video and I'm happy to give you some references for some better alternatives. So that is important to keep in mind, that ChatGPT uses, of course, information which is available on the internet, but doesn't necessarily give more weight to more up-to-date information or research which suggests that, okay, this is in these and these scenarios actually a better non-parametric approach than, for instance, Man-Whitney U. So yeah, here we see a few very clear limitations of ChatGPT, and of course a few questions which remain open, which is I had expected somehow that ChatGPT might have asked about at least one of them. But well, maybe it's just because of the way I've raised my prompt. But so I mean, of course, as I already said, that whether you use one method or another to analyze your data, it's not all. It's first of all a question of, okay, what's your research question? What are the hypotheses that you want to test in this? Because you run an experiment, you do that to test at least one hypothesis. And often it's more, but at least one hypothesis, and you do that with an experiment because you want to control as much as possible other factors that could confound your effect of interest. But well, of course, it's not only a question of that how that hypothesis is formulated. It's also a question, what do the distributions look like, right? And okay, ChatGPT already suggests that if assumptions underlying ordinal logistic regression are violated, well, then you might want to use non-parametric approaches, although even then it depends on what assumptions are violated. I will get to that in a minute. But well, again, I mean, you should have a look at your distributions to see if that most likely candidate, a priori, is indeed going to be the best option for data analysis now that you have the data. And a second question here is, are there repeated measurements? because, okay, it's not in the text. It seems that ChatGPT read this piece as, okay, one task is performed once in time by everyone, and that's rated on this ordinal scale. I understand that a program reads it this way, but well, I mean, it's often, I mean, in my experience as a statistician, when I talk to researchers, this is often how they present their text, their piece of information, either in a conversation or in an email. Um, and often when I ask, are there repeated measurements? Well, in about half of the cases, it turns out that there was some repeated measurements component. Well, and then you would need to consider alternative models that take that repeated measurement structure into account. Because what this basic cumulative link model assumes, and also many of the non-parametric approaches that are suggested by ChatGPT, such as Man Whitney U, is that there is independence of observations. Well, in the experiment at hand, that may well be the case if the participants are not identical twins, so 20 pairs of identical twins, or if there is some form of collaboration between participants, let's say in groups of 2 or groups of 4, because well, then you have that independence assumption violated. But it would also be violated if you have repeated measurements, because then at the level of like between participants there is still independence maybe, but within participants you have repeated measurements, and there tends to be a correlation between repeated measurements. So that is not an independent observation. So that's important. So that's a key question. And then in combination with these two questions, what do the distributions look like, and are there repeated measurements? Another key question is, are there missing data? Because if you have missing data, that brings your sample size down. Depending on whether or not you have repeated measurements, you can deal with your missing data in one set of ways or in another set of ways. So these are some important pieces of information. You could, for instance, instead of, okay, ChatGPT doesn't spit this out, but you might prompt students like, okay, what kind of questions could you ask given the prompt to ChatGPT and what it spits out? Well, because once a student has had training in descriptive and inferential statistics, they should come up with a look. But hey, the choice of methods is not just a matter of my setup; it's also a matter of are assumptions realistic, yes or no? Because every statistical method has assumptions, including the non-parametric ones. I mean, it's not that they are completely free of assumptions. No method is. But so you would want students who have had training to come up with this kind of information, or PhD students or other trainees that, in research, you would want them to think about this kind of questions, right? Critical thinking skills when it comes to research. Same for repeated measurements, same for missing data. And of course, another assignment could be, or reflection exercise. Okay, so this is the setup. This is a study with a given sample size, given design. Power, for instance, is very limited. And depending on what your distributions look like, well, ordinal logistic regression could be problematic. What could have been an alternative setup for the study? Or what would be a better sample size? Or what could a future study look like, right? Because at the end, also, no study is done in a vacuum. So it's done to address a gap in the literature. Once we've done that study, we know things we didn't know before. We become aware of things we were not aware of before. So yeah, we need future research. So this kind of questions, I mean, in my experience, at least for the current version of ChatGPT, that's where this kind of platforms, be it ChatGPT or DeepSeek, which is another platform I use, don't perform particularly well. And this is where we have room for teaching and for assessment also. I mean, it's probably pointless to continue with multiple choice exams, which see if someone can drill facts and recognize the fact from option A, B, or C in a bunch of 100 or 200 questions. I think that is no longer relevant for the year 2025, which is not to say, I mean, it's not to say that we shouldn't memorize or we shouldn't, like learn facts to some extent. Of course, it helps, but to have complete assessments based on just drilling facts, be it multiple choice, be it an open question format, I think that's not the most constructive way to do assessment, and not the most realistic way when it comes to the job market either, because it's not that people are going to be confronted on a daily basis with multiple choice scenarios. Should I use A, B, or C here? Oh well, this and this fact is what I've somewhere stored, so it should be B. That's not how it works, of course. No, we should use platforms like ChatGPT. And I think with this example, you can, I mean, yeah, it shows that there are ways still to teach and ways also to assess, right? Because, okay, ChatGPT doesn't perform yet well in asking these follow-up questions or thinking about next studies. But this is where there is room for academic programs or non-academic programs which teach this kind of skills. Okay, having said that, I think this is a nice moment to finish this video. It's about 20 minutes now. I don't want to make it much longer. I hope this is useful. If you have any questions or suggestions, just put a comment below this video. I'm happy to respond. And if you like this kind of content, I have a channel full of this kind of videos, so check it out. And in that case, I hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and have a nice day.